All right. Hello, everyone. Today I'm joined by Mike Camilleri of Safeguard Solutions. We've done an episode here already talking about what he does. He goes into people's houses looking for sources of EMF and mold and other environmental toxins and problems and helps the homeowner come up with solutions to actually mitigate that, whether by blocking it or removing the mold or whatever that is. So we're back again here today, but I wanted to dive a little bit more into the actual health consequences. I've done several EMF episodes here over the years and made other EMF content, but I usually just take it for granted that the audience believes this is bad. And truthfully, most of my audience will already believe it's bad, but in most cases, I've glossed over completely the evidence that it is actually bad for us. Me, myself, I'm sensitive myself, and I've also been in the business selling anti-EMF devices for many years, so I also just take this for granted. I can feel it myself, and that's enough proof for me, and for many other people who choose to avoid EMF. But for the broader world, I'm assuming that most people actually are sensitive to EMF, and they just don't know. Just like most people actually are sensitive to processed foods, and they just don't know. They say, well, I never had a problem with gluten before, but they get off of it and they feel better. You know, we don't really notice that we develop this sort of iron stomach to it. And, you know, we get all these minor things like headaches or maybe poor sleep, or you get tired in the afternoon and you just think this is totally normal. This is how humans are. This is how I've always felt because we've grown up in this environment of EMF and of processed foods. We don't notice the connection to our minor and maybe major health problems and those so-called normal things. So of course, being surrounded by EMF is totally normal at this point. Keeping a microwave in your pocket is totally normal. Every new car and all this stuff, they all have these microwave emitting devices built into them, many of which you can't even turn off if you wanted to. You can't just pull out the fuse. It's like deeply embedded into the car itself. I'm just saying it is very, very normal to be surrounded by EMF, but today we're going to go into why that may be a big problem. And for me, I do believe it's actually the biggest problem. Let me just put this on the table. I like to explain this, that in the nutrition business, it can be complicated. It can be fairly expensive. But at the end of the day, we are in control of what we put into our bodies and what we don't put into our bodies. So a bad nutritional environment in our food supply doesn't mean that you're stuck with a problem. You don't have to eat processed foods. You don't have to eat preservatives. You don't have to eat any of these food additives that worry you or any problematic food. You can avoid all that. You could grow some of your own food. You can buy off of small producers. You don't need to buy from the big commercial operations. You can take supplements to make up for the lack of nutrients in the soil. I'm just saying, by and large, it is a problem that we are in control of. But the problem with EMF is that we're not in control of it. Even if you choose to not use a cell phone, not use Wi-Fi, and have your home, completely protected from EMF, you still can't control what your neighbors are putting out. You can't go to a grocery store anymore without being blasted with all these different frequencies. It's not just fluorescent lights. Practically every business has Wi-Fi and other stuff. The stores are all wired up. All their cash registers are talking to each other wirelessly and all this stuff. You just can't prevent being exposed by going out into the normal world at all. So without completely isolating yourself, you're stuck facing this EMF problem. That's why I think it is so much of a bigger problem, because you can control. You don't have to do drugs. You don't have to drink alcohol. You don't have to jog on the highway at night wearing black. You can avoid a lot of the most dangerous things in this world just with common sense. But EMF, all the common sense in the world, won't get you away from the problem. So in order to actually get rid of this problem or lessen it in our society, the society at large actually has to recognize that it is a problem first and foremost. So maybe I shouldn't have skipped over this pretty important part of the message here. So let's go into it today. And Mike, before I do, just let me remind the audience that they could find everything that I do on my website, notusbooks.org, including all the books that I've written and helped publish, all the free audiobook versions of my books, hundreds of book reviews. Many of them are about EMF. Most of them are about health in general. And there's an archive of this podcast as well on the website, as well as all of my contact info and all the accounts that we have on Instagram and YouTube. You can find everything on notusbooks.org. So with all of that out of the way, Mike, how are you? What's up? What have you got for us today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking, and I'm excited to be back. And yeah, I would love to talk about why EMFs are important and how they affect our health. And I mean, like you said, I think you kind of hit it bang on with in terms of what we eat and is completely different from the environment that we live in. And the environment we live in, sometimes we don't have the choice, especially now with how technology is advancing and all the different things that are going on around us. Some of it is in our control, and some of it is not.
Well, you said last time that the biggest sources in the home are the things that we voluntarily bring in,
Yes,
aka the Wi-Fi and any of these new devices. Everything from an air purifier to a toaster could have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth capabilities.
that's
Just so
correct.
you
Yeah,
can monitor
absolutely.
your toast on your phone,
Yeah,
I guess. So
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
that is willing, but you think we can go into some of the sources that are a little bit beyond our control?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
how do we know that these things are bad for us? And I've before this, I went through a couple of books here, and there is mountains and mountains of studies, but some of it is a little bit complicated and hard to understand. There's all these different types of EMF. We've got dirty electricity. We've got very low frequencies or VLFs. We've got EMFs, regular. We've got ions. We've got all this stuff. So how can we tell which part of it is actually bad for us? And what is the worst part? Like, are there some devices that do emit a form of EMF that is not so bad for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's we have major sources of EMFs, right? I mean, those are the ones that we pretty much typically think of right away off the top of our head, right? And that's like the Wi-Fi coming from the modem, right? Or the cell tower, or a lot more people are becoming aware of the smart meters, right? Those are all the easy things to think of. But a lot of times when I go into people's homes, right, there's a lot of things that I can point out to them that they didn't even know were there, right? And we're talking about little things like fluorescent lighting. We're talking about things like Wi-Fi enabled freezers, washers, or dryers, right? These washers now are Wi-Fi enabled for the reason that if there's ever a flood or a leak, they have sensors on them that'll actually send notices to you if you're not home, right? Um, Again, these all have they have sensors built in to the actual unit itself, and those can be disabled, but they have to be taken apart to be disabled, right? So a lot of times people don't know. Those ones I call are more minor sources of wireless radiation, right? But I mean, even still, there's I usually like to break it down for clients to make it easier for them to understand in ways of um, there's high frequency RF wireless radiation sources, and then there's also low frequency, or like you said, VLFs, right? ELFs. Those are lower frequency electric field um, type sources, right? And those also go down to like what we were talking about before with dirty electricity and the wiring in our walls and the overall effect of how electric fields harm our body or interfere with the frequencies that our body normally runs on. And that, as in building biology, that's something that we very, very heavily lean on. It's all about the bedroom, right? So a lot of the sources we find inside our homes are sources that we can just with distance by itself, right? We can move things around so that they're not harming our body as well, right? I go into a lot of homes and the computers are in the bedrooms, and those are very high in dirty electricity, as well as like electric fields. And, having the wall right up against the bed where there's a receptacle outlet, you get a lot of electric fields coming off of that. Right. So, I mean, we break it down right down to the bare bones in terms of how it all comes together. And that includes when we do body voltage. Everything to do with electricity has to do with our body voltage. And before we can get our body voltage in the in the area where we want it to be, where it's healthy and where our body is rejuvenating and healing properly, right? We need to get all of those sources under control, and that's what we specialize in.
What do you think is the most harmful?
In terms of high frequency, it's definitely the Wi-Fi. In terms of low frequency or dirty electricity, we're looking more at higher sources. Like it's very situational based, right? If you're living in a small apartment, right, there's a lot more there that's packed into that apartment, right? Is the refrigerator, the stove, the air conditioner unit close to the bedroom? Are those fields passing through the walls where we sleep, right? Where's our modem placement, right? How many smart devices do we have, right? So it's very situational in terms of what is the worst, right? I think me and you talked a little bit about the cell towers that are close by to our homes, right? I have one right out my window in the backyard, so I've done everything humanly possible to shield against that, including EMF paint, EMF curtains, and I've done tons and tons of videos on that stuff and why I think it's so important. But it's very situational as to what is what is the worst thing for us.
Would you personally consider moving because of the cell phone tower?
I always tell clients, you can't run from it, right? Would I love to have chosen an area that's not right close by? Absolutely, 100%. But at the time when we bought the house, I don't know what I know today. So it took us, all I can do is I mean, the good thing is with cell towers and smart meters and even small cell antennas, the high frequency RF wireless radiation is actually very easy to shield from, right? With EMF paint, the curtains, there's a lot of different things that are available to us. And I mean, who's to say that if I were to sell the house today and move somewhere else and uproot my family, they're not going to put another one there tomorrow, right? And that's the big thing, is that there doesn't really seem to be any government regulation right now on where they can put these things, right? And I mean, that's the biggest thing for us, is that the cell tower is extremely close by, but I mean, they can put small cell antennas on the lights outside our house, and that's even closer, right? And that's a whole other topic. And I mean, here in Canada, we are lucky enough right now that is not as much of an issue, but I know in a lot of the major cities in the US, it's already been there for years.
This is a huge concern of mine, and I know we're veering away from the central theme. I do hope that we do get into the health implications. We'll go through some studies and stuff like that. But
yeah, absolutely.
When we moved to this place here about 5 years ago, almost exactly 5 years ago, up north, I knew about the EMF problem, but we also didn't have a lot of money. In fact, we didn't have any money. We had a line of credit, and so we bought the cheapest house we could, basically. And it is too close to a cell phone tower. It's not right beside us, but it's too close for my comfort, for sure. And my fear is that if I go, we have a little town beside us with no cell phone towers in it, one of the few. And my fear is buying a property there. And like you said, they can build a tower anywhere. There's nothing stopping them. The neighbor could rent out their roof, who knows? So,
Yeah.
it's just a matter of time before that town gets a cell phone tower, in my opinion. And then I'm looking for another property. Same thing. We're looking for a place in the US, because I'm not allowed to live there yet. So we have to have two places for a while. And same thing. There's a fear that I have to buy it so remote that it isn't likely that they put a cell phone tower up close to me, or that I don't have municipal streetlights in front of me for them to mess with, because it's not just the small cell towers that they could put in the lights. A lot of people are talking about these new lights, these new blue lights, and how it's bothersome. Just on a basic level, it doesn't look nice. And on a more insidious level, it could actually be messing with us with its constant flickering and possibly its EMF. So yeah, this is a concern of mine. And I'll tell you that when I've been looking at houses over the past few years all around America, especially in Texas and now in Colorado, I'm focusing on, I was now and then coming across a house that looks like a great deal. it's got what we need. It's the perfect size. This is a great price. What's going on? I get on the Google Earth and I start looking around the street view. Boom, there's a cell phone tower right beside it. No wonder it's so cheap. Nobody wants this house, right? Or it's right on a hydro field, or something else, a highway or something. But yeah, more
Yeah.
often than not, it's a cell phone tower, and it's very clear that the price is so far down to the rest of the market value in similar houses, similar area, because of the cell phone tower. So there's an unspoken, I think, recognition here that
Yeah.
nobody wants these beside them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, keep in mind too, there's some people are a lot more sensitive to the electromagnetic fields in the cell towers than others, right? So, like, if for instance, I have a lot of clients that they cannot be anywhere near a cell tower, right? And for them, it becomes difficult for them to put down roots anywhere in society. And that's one of the big things, right? Is that, I mean, I've knocked on doors, I've talked to people, in the areas around here in the Woodbridge area, and right underneath the tower, right? And they basically either don't have any idea about the health risks that they're taking by living there, or they just have the thought that, what, I've been living here this long, and if it's going to get me, it's going to get me. And that's sad, but I mean, there's only so much we can do to educate, right? And then at that time, the choice is up to them.
Some people actually say that it's safer directly underneath the tower because it radiates outwards. Is that true?
Yes, I believe that to be true. Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, I had a friend that lived in an apartment building, and the tower was it was on top of the building. And yeah, it seemed
Yeah,
that it was worse standing in the parking lot than it was actually in his apartment. And he was up
yeah,
close to the top floor as well. So
yeah.
it was surprisingly
Yeah.
little. You could still
No,
hear
but
the buzz
so
from all the electrical equipment, but
if that's what I was going to say. If that's the case, then why do they make the repair technicians wear all that heavy duty equipment, right? I think there comes a point when you're too close, you're too close as well, right? I don't know. I wouldn't feel comfortable living with it on top of me. That's
no,
for sure.
me either. I've lived very, very close to one time, and it drove me nuts. And it's partially because I am aware of it. I am psyching myself into it, and the other half, I do believe I'm sensitive. Yeah, I know we can make these things up in our own head, but it was a pretty
Yep.
miserable few months living beside that tower for sure. So you mentioned that the high frequency uh radiation, like from cell phone towers and stuff, it doesn't go very far, and we touched on that last time. That's why they want to put these small cell towers literally
That's what,
everywhere, because
yeah.
they don't go through trees and
Well,
bricks so well.
yep. That's for the 5G frequencies, right? So the higher the frequency, the smaller the wave, and the smaller the wave, the more susceptible it is to interference.
So is this kind of how like an AM radio station with a big huge wave can travel for like tens and
Yep,
hundreds of miles basically?
that's correct. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It passes through everything, right? So it's not as susceptible to interference, and you'll always get better reception with that. And that's why I think that, what, like, um in order for 5G to work, that's what they've come up with. And now you're starting to see these small cell antennas everywhere. And the one thing that I do notice is that, I see a lot of the videos and pictures that you post, and it, it seems like in the US a lot of it is disguised. They're hiding it, blending it in with a lot of the background. In Canada here, nothing is really disguised. It's right there, right in your face, and it's it's terrible. But yeah, there's you can't hide from it. It's everywhere.
Yeah, actually, the reason that I chose to just focus on the cell phone towers is because they were so horrifyingly ugly and like
Yeah.
aggressive. Like they just look bad. They look dangerous. And from what I know, at least back then when I started the Transcend Tower account, the only lawsuits that I saw being won were those that were wedged on were those that were waged on aesthetic grounds and property value grounds. So people were able to block some cell phone towers from going up and actually to
Yeah.
get a few of them taken down, but it was
Yep.
never on a health argument. They weren't there in court saying, "Oh, I'm sensitive to this. I can hear it buzzing." None of that. It was all about aesthetics and property value. Like having this tower there lowers the property value. So the tower companies are private companies, as you would know, and that they're not the same companies that own the telecom. Like here in Canada, we have Bell and Rogers, basically two monopolies that are kind of the
Yep.
same thing. But Bell and Rogers doesn't own the towers. A different company owns the towers. They lease space on the towers. In America, there's a few more telecom companies, but same basic thing. Two giant monopolies for the most part. But there's more tower companies also that bid for um, contracts to build these towers. And so those tower companies, they come up with these camouflage uh, designs, basically. So it's a product feature when they're bidding for the contract. They're saying, "Hey, not only will we build the tower, but ours looks like a pine tree, so it's less
Yeah.
likely to get angry community groups rallying against it. It's less likely to come up in court in a lawsuit if it's more aesthetically pleasing." And yeah, you're right. We don't do that in Canada. No one cares. Let's just put up these atrociously ugly. Even if they weren't bad for us, they're so ugly. They're such eyesores. As if Toronto was not ugly enough. To be honest, I think it's one of the ugliest places in the world.
Yeah.
No compassion for Toronto. But then you put up all these cell phone towers and short as well. A lot of them are amazingly short. Like there's no regulations even on how high it is and how far away from an apartment. Some of these are like they're literally on the wall of the apartment. Like you go out onto the balcony. Oh, there's cell phone towers. You know, literally right there. You can touch them with your hands if you wanted to. It's insane.
Yeah. It's
Let
too
me
close.
let me back up here a second. We're talking about the long or the high frequencies, and that they're the easiest to shield. Does that mean that the very low frequencies, the ELF, does that stand for extremely low frequencies? Are those the
Yeah.
hardest to block?
No, not necessarily. I mean, the thing to know about uh VLFs or electric fields or dirty electricity, um, I just basically the best thing to know there is it's all proximity, right? So the closer you are to it, right, the higher it is, right? So for example, if you think about it this way, um, they just don't travel far distances, right? They stick very close to the actual source itself, right? So whether it be the wiring in the walls or the receptacles, right, that are close by to the bed, or whether it be the microwave, the stove, or the refrigerator, right? The electric fields and magnetic fields, they don't travel far distances. So I would usually 3 to 5 feet is the distance that you'll start to see it drop back down to normal, right? And again, it depends on the source too, but it's usually within 3 to 5 feet, it really starts to die off.
So that's true whether it's low frequency or high frequency.
So low frequency only. High frequency is more of the wireless radiation. That's what we kind of define it by, right? So I try not to get it can get confusing, right? But the high frequency, I usually think of wireless devices, wireless radiation. That's the best way to describe it. The lower frequency is more for electric fields and magnetic fields.
Okay, it's the field that the thing is giving off just by virtue of being plugged into the grid in the first place,
That's right.
or
Yes,
just by having
100%.
electric circuits in it at all.
Yep, absolutely. That's correct. Yes.
And you mentioned on the last episode we did that it's quite easy to shield them just using wires, or shield a lot of this problem just by using wires. And I assume also like circuits themselves, like inside the computer. If you can have an insulated wire in your wall, then it would certainly be quite easy to engineer in, a protected circuit board that doesn't leak out. So that is a seemingly easy solution. It's just there's
Yep.
absolutely no effort put in by industry at all.
No,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
let me say too, apologize that I'm doing quite a lot of talking here, but our last episode got me pretty inspired. I've already been into this for a while, but I finally bought another meter again. We had
Oh,
this one
fantastic.
before. We still have it at the store, but I didn't have my own meter, so I bought another tri-field TF2 that you recommended is a good, baseline consumer model.
It
And
is. Yep.
the first thing that it did was really wake my wife up to a lot of this stuff. I've been saying this for years, but when it's just you saying it and it's just coming from books, it's a little bit hard to believe. But yeah, we walked around the house with the meter and discovered or showed her that all these outlets, they're constantly like, there's nothing plugged into an outlet. Well, it's leaking out radiation. All the switches, all the light switches, they were some of the worst ones in the house actually, were unused outlets and switches, as well as all lamps. Like it looks like just a simple, oh, it's just a lamp. Well, it was making the meter go crazy. The television, of course, even when it wasn't on, it's just plugged in. Boom, huge electric field around it. And for me, my record player here it's my housemate's record player. It's a great record player, but wow, it's got a huge electric field from it all the time, even when it's not doing anything. So I've been
Does, yeah.
trying to unplug
Yeah.
everything basically when I'm not using it, but
That's right. Yep.
even the
Not
outlets
only that, you're
themselves.
saving on your electric bill too, right?
Yeah, because the electricity is running through it, right? Even if it's just on standby.
Yeah. Yeah. If it's plugged in, then it's generating an electric field. Right.
Yeah,
And that's the big thing is like even for people that work in offices, right? Having power bars or your computers nearby all day long, right? It those are generating high levels of electric fields, right? So there's a lot of grounding, earthing things you could do there, right? And that will help to negate some of the electric fields. And again, keep in mind too that those all raise our body voltage, right? So when electric fields are higher in areas over long periods of time, it's the environments that we're putting our bodies in that's elevating our body voltage. And the body voltage is something that is a lot of studies have gone into it, and doctors are saying that when we're not controlling our body voltage, it is severely impacting our body's way of being able to heal.
let's talk about some of these studies. What do these body voltage studies do?
So the body voltage is, so let's talk, I guess, a little bit about what body voltage is first, right? So our body all runs off of frequencies, right? Through those frequencies, it basically, it's the amount of electric fields our body is storing, right? So when we talk about earthing and grounding, right, people use earthing and grounding techniques to release the electric fields that build up in our body, right? So think about these electric fields, the storage of these electric fields in our bodies as toxins, right? If we have too much of it, right, it's going to start to interfere with how our body generally heals, right? And that's what our sleep is all about, right? When our bodies shut down at nighttime, they shut down in order to be able to heal properly and rest and recover. And that's why we need to control the environment that we are sleeping in and living in order to keep our body voltage low. For high frequency RF wireless radiation, it affects us a little bit different, right? It affects us in a way that on a cellular level, right? So I don't know if you guys have heard of voltage gated calcium channels, right? But these voltage gated calcium channels are in our it's more on a cellular level. So what happens is when the wireless radiation is attacking the cells, when it's hitting our bodies, absorb. Basically, what happens is it's rapidly creating, multiplying these calcium channels, right? And when that happens, we start to see a lot more of the free radicals being created in the cells. And then once the free radicals are there, that's when we start to see a lot of terrible things happening inside the body.
So this can basically be messing up our fundamental electrolyte balance because
That's right.
the calcium channel you're talking about, that's one of several electrolyte channels. Electrolytes are
Yep.
water soluble nutrients, basically, or nutrients that can possess an electric charge. So electrolytes are substances that have a natural positive or negative electric charge when dissolved in water. The water soluble calcium, potassium, sodium are the main ones. So yeah, EMF can mess with that. Okay, so go on. In the studies, what does this translate to in terms of body effects if it changes the voltage gated calcium channels?
Yeah, absolutely. So you start to see a lot of different things, right? Like tinnitus, right? Or a lot of people report not being able to sleep, right? So insomnia. The cancers again it's classified as a class 2 carcinogen.
Yeah, I agree. And even someone like me who's supposed to look at the whole picture, we call ourselves holistic, right? It's still
Mhm.
not realistic. I still have to make some sort of a guess as to what
Yeah.
the biggest contributors are going to be. And in every case, since I don't address EMF directly. It's not even on our questionnaire because I don't even know what I'd put. Do you think you're sensitive to EMF? You know, and I don't even know what I would
Yeah.
necessarily recommend after that. I'm just saying I have to assume that it does contribute in many cases or most cases or maybe all cases. You mentioned a couple of things interesting earlier. Well, you already mentioned headaches, but you also mentioned tinnitus. And I say
Yep.
this all the time. There's three major causes of tinnitus or vertigo, dizziness, and one of them is EMF. It's the most common one that we see these days is people wearing Bluetooth headphones. We tell them just stop wearing the Bluetooth headphones and the tinnitus often goes away. And that's proof positive that it was causing it. Normally things aren't so clear cut, but it's only after the fact that we can determine that it was a problem here. Just kind of going back into the doctor thing. The doctor can't really know until they solve the problem and they can definitively link it to what you actually did to change it. So in the case of tinnitus, I don't know if it was caused just by dehydration. I don't know if it was caused by osteoporosis of the skull, which is also a possibility. And I don't know if it's caused by EMF, but if we get rid of the tinnitus and we can look at what we did and we can assume that, okay, well, if you stopped using the Bluetooth headphones and it went away, then EMF obviously was the cause. If you
Perfect.
rehydrated yourself quickly and your headache got a lot better, and then you stayed hydrated the next couple of weeks and you never got another headache, well, that's proof positive that you were dehydrated and that was the solution. If it takes 3 months to rebuild the bone density to reverse the osteoporosis, then that's also proof that it was osteoporosis. But I do find it interesting that many of the symptoms of EMF, the acute symptoms, the quick symptoms, we're not talking about, your chances of getting cancer, we're talking about things like tinnitus and headache and insomnia. Your acute symptoms are almost the exact same as dehydration symptoms of lacking those water soluble nutrients and lacking water, including tinnitus, including vertigo. And I think it is interesting with that calcium channel thing because if the EMF disrupts your electrolyte channels, that can actually cause you to be dehydrated. And I don't mean to do a commercial here, but I've been very interested in hydrogen water recently. Actually, since the last time we talked, Mike, I got involved with a hydrogen water company
Yeah.
and invested in the machine myself. It was not a cheap machine. It's in fact the biggest investment I've ever made in my own health. And before we got that machine, we did some blood work, my wife and I, seeing if there was anything noticeable. And on my blood work, I was pretty surprised that I was actually dehydrated. There was 3 signs of dehydration on my blood work, whereas I'm super hydrated all the time. I'm so hydrated. I take so many water soluble nutrients. I don't dehydrate myself. 1 cup of coffee a day. I'm not taking diuretics, anything like that. Why the heck would I be dehydrated on my blood work? And could this explain why I feel so crummy down in Houston and why I have such trouble sleeping? And I think
Yeah.
so, because when we got on the hydrogen water, I was only able to do it for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks before I left. But after the 2 weeks, got another set of blood work, and I was no longer dehydrated. And I was sleeping way better and feeling way better. And, as you were saying earlier, that these free radicals are created in the cell because of the EMF. Well, those free
Yep.
radicals can be neutralized by the hydrogen in the hydrogen water. Just that's in the hydrogen water episode, by the way. Like I said, did not mean to make this into a commercial, but I do find it interesting that there is a biological explanation as to how EMF can cause dehydration by interfering with those electrolyte channels.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Like here's a list. So like what I like to do is before I go in on my assessments into clients' homes, I have a checklist that was actually generated by a good friend of mine, a doctor. Basically, we use these checklists to get an idea as to the symptoms that the client may have, and if there is a sensitivity there, right? And I actually have it here in front of me. I'll just go through it real quick. Some of the symptoms that we have for EMFs are rapid aging, difficulty concentrating, restless sleep, like tossing and turning, waking up often through your sleep, always feeling tired, needing extra sleep, never feeling refreshed, blurry and unclear vision, hyperactive tendencies, mood disorders, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, headaches and migraines, memory loss, always feeling irritable, right? Histamine sensitivities, skin issues, rashes, and itching, right? So again, you can see probably the connection between these things, why it would be so hard, right? For a doctor to be able to actually diagnose these things. And here's a few more. Some of these are actually really good, right? Dizziness, nausea, restless leg syndrome, right? Loss of appetite, blood sugar issues, right? That's a big one, right? Menstrual problems, right? Your menstrual frequency being thrown off by these electromagnetic fields. So yeah, these are all the things that we kind of look at, right? And by cleaning up the environment, the reason that we ask our clients to do this with us is because we want to be able to see if after we cleaning up these environments, if these things are improving, right? And that's what we aim for.
The difficulty concentrating one is interesting to me because obviously the phone itself makes it quite hard to concentrate.
Yeah.
You know, right
Yeah,
before we started recording here, I had to throw my phone across the room, or else it'll just never stop. It'll constantly distract me, and
yeah,
if I'm trying to do anything else other than be on the phone itself is a distraction. So it's hard to concentrate on anything else. That's just, the social aspect of carrying around a phone and being on demand all the time and all the stuff, constantly contactable. But it's interesting that the EMF itself could also contribute to difficulty concentrating. And to me, that, makes it seem very obvious why we're having such a big problem in today's schools with kids
yeah,
concentrating and
yeah,
the
absolutely.
overdiagnosis of ADD, ADHD, the EMF, and the biggest distraction devices ever invented,
Yep,
combined into one.
absolutely. And again, you know what? That's why this all comes down. A lot of it comes down to our bodies, how we sleep, right? And our rest and recovery and how we heal, right? These are all things that are massive, right? In terms of our health, and the environments we're living in really dictate how well we're going to be able to sleep, right? I mean, there's other factors too, right? Like stress and, that's something nowadays that, I mean, everybody's stressed out, right? Whether it be about money or our situation or our jobs. These are all things that impact so many things on a different level. And the our environments that we're in, if we can keep them clean, free of toxins, then it's one step closer to what we want.
So I think you explained this last time, but I'm going to ask you for a little bit of clarification. I'm holding a book called Dirty Electricity by Samuel Milham.
Yep.
Samuel Milham's kind of a big name in the EMF uh, world. And this book is somewhat famous. I would say it's gotten quite a lot of exposure. So he's talking about here about dirty electricity, of course, name of the book. But so there are many sources of dirty electricity in today's electrical equipment. Examples of electrical equipment specifically designed to operate by interrupting current flow include light dimmer switches that interrupt
Yeah.
the current twice per 60 hertz cycle, or 120 times per second. Power-saving compact fluorescent lights that interrupt the current at least 20,000 times per second,
That's
halogen
right.
lamps, electronic transformers, and most electronic equipment manufactured since the mid-1980s that use switching or switch mode power supplies.
Yeah.
older fluorescent lighting systems also generate dirty electricity. So what is it about interrupting the AC that creates this dirty electricity? And is
Yeah,
the dirty electricity a particle thing or a frequency thing?
it's a frequency thing, right? But basically, what happens is anything with a variable speed motor, right? Or think of it as it's chopping up the electricity. It's breaking the flow, right? So basically, electricity is meant to flow on 60 hertz, 50, 60 hertz in Canada, in the US, right? So when we have computers, refrigerators, air conditioning units, the wiring in the walls, the um, all of these sources are basically running on variable speed motors, ceiling fans, right? It chops up the electricity, right? So
Variable
it's not,
speed meaning like you can turn your ceiling like you can pull the
yeah,
cord once and it goes slow, you pull it
exactly.
again, it goes
Yeah,
medium speed, pull
that's
it
right.
another time, it's super fast, one more time it's turned
Yeah,
off. That's what a variable motor
yeah.
is.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. That's dirty electricity. There's another component to all of this too. Like in a manufacturing world, there's basically a lot of what we call EMI, right? Which is an interference issue, right? So basically, they get electromagnetic interference. They call it, right? So that's another kind of area. So it's not just in our homes; it's our workplaces are watching out for electromagnetic interference as well, right? So that's another dirty electricity, electric field issue.
So when it interrupts the cycle, how is it giving off a frequency? And it's not giving off 60 hertz anymore. It's giving off a different range of
Yeah,
frequencies.
that's
But
right.
what is it about the chopping that does it?
It basically it's very hard to describe, but it's the chopping of the electricity basically is it becomes airborne, right? So when it basically interferes in that with the cycle, right, it becomes airborne, and that's when you start to see the dirty electricity. So dirty electricity kind of flows. There's two different types. There's field dirty electricity. That's the one that kind of emanates through the air, right? And then there's also dirty electricity on the wiring in our walls of our homes, right? And that one is again, it's basically frequencies that are coming into our homes higher than the standard 60 hertz.
And that's because the appliances usually, unless they're designed
Yeah,
otherwise, they
that's right.
feed back
Yeah,
into the system.
that's right. Yeah, that's correct. And you know what? Again, like going back to it, sometimes it's not even just the appliance. A lot of times, the power that's coming into our homes is already dirty from the utility company, right? So not all of and that's where you start to see, like in the US, this is big. They use whole home filters, right, for dirty electricity. So basically, they're right on our panel. So when it comes into the home, they're filtering out those bad frequencies, right? So that what's left is 60 hertz, right? So it starts there, right? But then you have the sources as well that can cause the dirty electricity, like the dimmer switches, like you said, right? And the computers in our homes and the refrigerators. These are all sources that are higher in dirty electricity.
So would this be a reasonable analogy? I'm picturing a stream of water coming from the tap, and I run my hand through it really quickly, and I just chop the water,
Yes, sir.
and
Yep.
the water is still basically a continuous stream unless you slowed it down and saw the moment that it was disrupted. But I put my hand through so quickly that you wouldn't notice it for the stream. If someone was there with a cup, they wouldn't see a disturbance. It'd just still be a stream. But I've splashed some water around when I'm chopping my hand through it. Is that kind of like it
That's
is?
correct. Yep,
Okay, so
absolutely.
I've just disturbed the stream a little bit, and I'm releasing
Yep.
some of that energy out,
Yep.
and that can happen in our power lines as well. Just it
That
leaks
that
out
right
with this.
there pretty much too also describes like the same kind of thing that's happening inside our bodies, right? With like with our body voltage, right? Because you think about it, right? Our organs, our brain, our hearts, everything in our bodies running off of frequencies, right? Where we're made up of electricity, right? So it's the same type of thing when these frequencies are interfering, right? It's basically creating havoc, inside of us, inside our bodies, right? So that's why you hear a lot of people talking about the earthing and grounding aspect to the natural release of electric fields.
Fair enough. And so also back on the dirty electricity, I bought a little filter thing off of you after our last conversation. It just plugs into an outlet.
Yep.
How is that cleaning the dirty electricity? How does it work?
Absolutely. So the dirty electricity filters are actually designed to filter out the bad frequencies that are coming into our homes. So that basically what they're doing is they're only leaving the ones that are supposed to be there, right? So they're made and designed to filter out the frequencies that are much higher than 60 hertz or a lot lower than 60 hertz. And there's a couple different filters that are on the market, right? And the only difference really between them is that they filter out different frequencies, right? So they filter out, there's the Stetzer filter and there's the green wave filters, right? And they are pretty similar in terms of the frequencies that they filter out, but they do vary a little bit. I think, for like my training is basically we use the Stetzer filters. Those are the ones that we use, right? But green wave is very, very good as well.
But do they collect it on a plate or something? Like I'm just not understanding how they filter it. Because you think about
Yeah.
particles, then yeah, obviously you put up a net of the fabric or something that will catch it, and it filters it. That's a standard filter, or it attracts particles to it, like charcoal or something. So is there something attracting the dirty electricity in there or storing it? Like what's going on inside that box?
To be honest with you, I'm actually not sure. That's a good question. I have not looked into that part of it, as to like how it's being filtered, right? That's more on the engineering side of it, but it's I do know them to be very effective in terms of the frequencies that they are filtering out, and that's our the goal of them is to filter those frequencies.
And the dirty electricity will almost all be in the VLF range, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's correct.
So you need your like highly sensitive meters to see it. Like you won't see it on
Yeah.
my little tri-field.
No, you won't. No. So like I use the NFA 1000 gigahertz solutions meter, and that meter goes down low enough in order to see those frequencies. And if you go back a couple minutes ago when we were talking about field dirty electricity and the emanating of these electric fields into the open air, right? From like our ceiling fans and the different sources that chop up the electricity, it actually comes equipped with different LED lights to show us the frequencies that we're seeing, right? So if it's detecting under 2 kilohertz, right, which is the dirty electricity range, then you can see it'll light up red, right, indicating to us that there's dirty electricity in that area.
Okay, and this book that I'm holding still, Samuel Milham, Dirty Electricity, he seems to be arguing that the dirty electricity or the extremely low frequencies are actually more of a problem than the high frequency sources.
Yeah, there's you know what, I would never say that one is worse than the other, but there's a lot of industry leaders that do say that dirty electricity is much worse, right, than our cell towers and our smart meters and all our smart devices, right? And that's a whole different ballgame in terms of what's worse for you, right? Eating a hamburger or eating French fries, right? It all comes down to the different nutrients that are in both and how it's prepared and all these different things, right? I mean, dirty electricity is a problem, right? And we look, that's the one thing that I've actually come across is that dirty electricity is the one part of the EMF industry that is it's argued on so many different ways, right? And I think what a lot of it comes down to is um, grounding and earthing, right? When we talk about grounding and earthing, we talk about how do we ground, how do we earth, right? The EMF paint, right? On our wall, on the walls when we put it up the block from the cell towers, it's all grounded, right? So there's a big discrepancy right now between how effective is it? How effective is the grounding, right? And then we start to talk about dirty grounds, right? And that's a whole other topic that's very it's battled between the different building biologists and leaders in the industry on what works, what doesn't work, right? For me, I feel like we have no choice but to use what we visually see works, right? And what is proven to work, right? There's always going to be some people that say this works versus this doesn't work, or this works, this doesn't work. And we have to stick to our training, right? We have to stick to our training. We have to stick to what we are trained to how to treat. It's like a doctor, right? Doctors treat our symptoms based on their education, right? It's the same way.
So let me tell you a story about grounding. So after our last conversation, as I said, I bought the meter and I decided to try and foil over an outlet that in Texas in my office, there's an outlet that's like really close to my head. I don't know who makes an outlet 3.5 feet off the ground. Very silly. So I'm sitting in my chair and it's basically right beside my head. So I said, I'm going to cover this. But also you said you don't know how protective aluminum foil is. Someone's got to study that. So I took some aluminum foil, I folded it up a bunch of times, and I held it in front of the outlet, and I took my meter, and this is me, both hands here. One hand is holding the aluminum foil, the other hand is holding the meter, and I saw it was basically zero. It was just like I folded it a bunch of times, so let's say 6 or 8 layers thick, and it went to zero. But then I taped it on, and I pulled the meter out again, and it wasn't zero. It had only gone down a little bit. I think it was at on its own, it was like 150 volts per meter or something like that. And I put the tinfoil up and it went down to like 120 or something. So it was a drop, but it wasn't a massive drop. But the point is that when I was holding it, this is where I realized I made the mistake. When I was holding the aluminum foil and putting the meter up to it, it was registering zero. But now I'm figuring that was because it was running through me instead. So as soon as I disconnected from it and I just put it on the wall itself, it had only shown that it was blocking it just a small bit, a meaningful bit, but yeah. So it was dissipating through me, and I found that very interesting. That to me that was proof positive that absolutely grounding out that that static would register zero. So I don't know if that's a concrete proof. I know it's not concrete.
Yeah, no, it's actually very similar. Like the our bodies can sometimes act as insulators as well, or conductive. We are conductive, right? We are conductive human beings. So, like, for example, I'll give you when I was doing a body voltage testing, right? We basically have the person lie down on the bed, right? They're basically connected, holding a rod and a cable that goes to the ground in the receptacle to basically calculate the differential potential, right? And the lady had a dog with her, and dogs are they're conductive as well. So the dog being beside her on top of her actually made her body voltage go up sky high, right? So like and you can see it if you place one hand on somebody during a body voltage testing, right? You'll see your body voltage will actually increase their body voltage. So it's actually really interesting to see that.
Why is that?
It's just transferring the electric fields, right, from your body to their body, and you see it instantly. It goes right up. It's crazy to see.
So is the dog building up a static charge then?
Yeah, absolutely, because they run off electricity just like us.
Well, I know they sell grounding mats for pets as well.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So going back to this book here, because we're here to talk about some of this studies and stuff. And he's talking about here a 1994 study of Canadian and French electric utility workers. This was sponsored by Hydro Quebec. It showed a 15-fold increase risk of lung cancer in workers exposed to pulsed high-frequency magnetic fields with a rising incidence according to dose. So I guess that's what you were kind of saying earlier too, that with whether it's a high frequency or low frequency, your proximity and the amount of time that you're exposed are the most important factors. How close you are and how long you stay exposed. Risk ratios this high are almost never seen in studies using power frequency magnetic fields. Risk ratios this high are almost never seen in studies using power frequency magnetic fields as a metric. These findings were independent of a worker's smoking status. Unfortunately, Hydro-Quebec sequestered the data and disappeared the positron meter used to make the exposure measurements. So no replication or follow-up was possible by anyone else. So independent of their smoking status. I think everyone's so used to thinking of lung cancer as a disease of smokers that that
Yeah.
could be a little bit shocking that, workers exposed to pulsed high frequency magnetic fields had a 15-fold increase in lung cancer. So why do you think that is when it comes to lung cancer?
When it comes to lung cancer, I mean, that's one of the things is it's very inconclusive, right? I personally don't see the connection there. I don't see the connection. And I mean, that's maybe I'm not a doctor, so it's hard for me to be able to say if there is or would not be a connection there, in terms of, being exposed to there. It's lung cancer is, I mean, even cancer in itself, like it's just the studies are not there, right? The studies are not there. And I mean, they say it's a class 2 carcinogen, right? But in terms of actually how it causes cancer, or I mean, it comes down, I guess it really comes back to the free radicals and the way that our cells are multiplying with the calcium, right? That's at a very scientific base level, though. I mean, it's hard to say why that would be causing lung cancer itself.
Well, we believe that there is several main causes of lung cancer, and smoking is far down the list because smoking rates have gone so far down recently. We're in Canada here. The national smoking rate is about 10% right now. I live up north. It's probably closer to 50% up here, but still, lung cancer did not go away when the national smoking rates plummeted down. Same in the US. The US smokes more than we do still, but it's gone down significantly. In Australia, it's gone down below 10%. I believe it's at 9% currently. So these are extremely low rates of smoking, yet the actual rate of lung cancer hasn't changed at all. We believe that free radicals do have something to do with the majority of cases as well, especially in breathing in fumes from deep frying or oxidized oils, cooking oils. Someone's standing over the stir fry, all
Yeah,
the time. They're breathing in these free radical particles. It's bad
yeah,
to eat them as well. They're on our bad food list, but it's the cook
yeah,
who's being exposed to a lot of them day in and day out, breathing those particles in. And of course, you could get aerosols. I like to use spray paint as a hobby. I know it burns the lungs, it burns the tissues. It's an extra
yeah.
source of free radicals, and there's all kinds of aerosols in that
Yep.
category as
There's
well. We
there's the
believe that almost all cancers will have both a deficiency component, a nutrient deficiency component, and an antagonist component. And we do believe that free radicals are one of the main antagonists in the majority of cases of lung cancer. But I was surprised to read that as well because it didn't make that much direct sense. Like it does make sense that professions exposed to wood, for example, wood chips, sawdust, that they actually have higher rates of lung cancer. But some of these other studies here from this book and other books, they were talking about the most common cancers being caused by EMF in laboratory animals being in the hormone glands, basically. The thyroid or the adrenals or the testicles or the ovaries. Something involved with the hormone glands and organs. They're the most likely sites of an EMF caused cancer.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And like I'm starting to see a lot more because now our company is offering mold inspections, and we test for air quality. So we're doing a lot of testing for the VOCs, formaldehyde, particulates, all those sorts of things as well. So those are also major toxins that are in our homes as well, right? And it's the stuff that we can't see. They're particle sized, right? So they're again, it comes down to like short term these things like the VOCs and the formaldehyde, they're going to irritate your eyes, your nose, your throat, your lungs, right? But long term exposure to these things can definitely lead to, like you were saying, the free radicals in our lungs that are causing the cancers. So that's, I mean, it's not just the molds and stuff like that that could be causing it. It's all these other toxins as well that, it's just, radon, right? Radon is the second biggest cancer causing, next to cigarette smoke, right? And the radon, it's a gas that basically it seeps out through the earth, and it's actually decomposing uranium, right? It comes up through the cracks in the foundation of our home, and that's something that is becoming a bigger issue, and something that people are starting to pay a lot more attention to. And I mean, for something like that, for radon, we leave a meter in your basement for about 30 days, and it's just an accumulative measurement that builds up. And if it builds up over a certain level, then we recommend that there needs to be a proper way of removing this radon from your home, right? And that's usually done with a remediation company, where basically they're sucking the air out from the home, kind of like with a HRV air system, right? Something very similar to that. But yeah, radon is another big lung cancer causing agent.
When people come to you to check their house, I imagine most of them would be just concerned citizens that just want a better environment. But how many of them actually do have an active, serious disease like cancer when they call you?
Not a lot, not a lot, right? And usually it's because they don't know what's wrong, right? A lot of the clients, 9 times out of 10, it's because their daughter's sick, right? Their son is sick. I'm just not feeling well. I haven't been feeling well for a long time. I've been going to the doctor, talking with them about what it could be that's going on. They've recommended getting an air test done, right? So that's what we do. We go in and we test for everything. We look to see room by room what's causing it. And that's why I also think that when it comes back to it, right, I have a whole separate checklist of symptoms for mold, right? And visually, mold can be there, and it also can be airborne where you can't see it. I go into a lot of homes, and this is the scary part, because it's not always comfortable to be wearing your protective equipment, right? I have N95 masks that I wear in people's homes, right? But when you're in a home for 2 to 3 hours, right, and with an N95 mask on, it's not always so comfortable. But I'm telling you, I go into people's homes, and the homes are clean. There's nothing. There's visually nothing that you can see that wrong, and that's what makes it so crazy. Is that these things, we can't visually see them all the time, right? That black mold present all over the wall, you see it, right? But I can go in and I run air tests, and when we send them off, they go to a microbiology lab, and the microbiology lab will send us the report, and it'll break down the kind of mold that it is, the amount of spores that are there that at present at the time. And when we get the reports back, we think to ourselves, my goodness, there was nothing visually there that we could see that looked like it was because of mold. And then at that time, we go back and we look and we do a second run, and then a lot of times we find the source as to what's causing it. But there's a lot of homes that looks like there's nothing wrong at all, and it's there, it's present. It's because we can't see it.
What do you think the solution is to that? I mean, of course, yeah, we can kill the mold and
Yeah.
put new walls up and stuff like that. But is there a design fix to this? Like, is there something more ventilation or something in our homes would help not produce as much mold? What is the
Yeah,
solution?
you have to take a look at the humidity levels of the home, right? You want to always make sure, if your humidity is too high, right, you want to look at using your humidifier on your furnace. right? To basically keep that in control. And sometimes like there's um, usually industry standard is about between 35 and 45, ideally, percent humidity in the home, right? And so that's why a lot of people now what they're doing is, like on these ecobee thermostats and stuff like that, it basically it gives you the measurement of the humidity, right? And that's something now that a lot of people are starting to pay attention to as well. Is the humidity levels in the home, right? Making sure your furnace filters are clean and changed regularly. Most furnace manufacturers recommend changing your furnace filters every 90 days, right? So every 3 months, it's good to change your furnace filters. HRV systems are becoming huge. Blue lights on the furnace that basically kill a lot of the bad bacteria that become airborne and are throughout our homes, right? Those are phenomenal, right? Mobile air filters, right? That people there's a lot of high end ones now that you can buy. You keep them in your bedrooms, right? You keep them throughout the house. Um, that's something that's becoming really big as well, right? But the one thing that I am noticing outside of the EMF world is how many people are suffering from air quality issues inside their homes. Some of these people are people that own their own homes and have full 100% control of changing the quality of their air. And then there's others who are renters and fully depend on the landlords to take control and provide them with good quality air, right? And I mean, some of my clients are on both sides, right? Um, and it we represent sometimes the landlord, and we'll go in and we got to make sure that things are okay for the tenant. And sometimes it's the tenant that hires us, and because of a concern that the landlord's not recognizing. And so that's something there as well.
All right, and yeah, I think these issues combined, really add up to the bulk of the problem inside of our homes. I do agree that air quality is one of the big ones, as you said too, in perfectly clean houses too. It doesn't matter how clean you keep your house. Either the environment is promoting the growth of bacteria and mold, or it's not. So high tech filters, basically, you're saying like UV light filters, kind of like airborne bug zappers for
Yeah, that's right.
microbes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's something, you know what? I think they're very cost effective, right? They're not something that's overly expensive, and also even getting them installed on the filter on the furnace itself is not expensive either, right? So, and I tell you, there's something that they're amazing. I mean, you can buy the mobile, like the air doctors, right? There's a couple different brands that are really, really good. Air Doctor is one that I see a lot of in homes where people are using, and they are designed to catch a lot of the very, very small microbe toxins, right? It all comes down to, like, they do teach us a lot of this in building biology school as well. It's not just EMFs, but it's the building materials that we're using that are changing, right? That are off gassing inside our homes, right? So you think about VOCs, you think about like using a paint that you buy at your Home Depot, right? Some of them are
Volatile
higher.
organic compounds, by the way,
You got
VOCs.
it. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I mean, I absolutely recommend buying low VOC paint. It's a little bit more expensive, right? But over time, the off gassing of that paint can make a big difference. And it's not just for the standard person who has asthmas or breathing conditions. Comes down to um, when I talk to a lot of clients, they say to me, they say, "Hey, Mike, you know what? Like, I wasn't always like this, right? I was healthy. I was active. I ate well. I worked out all the time. Um, and that's when it comes down to is the environment that we're living in, right? Not a lot of people know about the formaldehyde, right? Formaldehyde, it sounds scary, right? But it's actually the thing about formaldehyde is it's the natural off-gassing of the things around us, right? You think about like IKEA furniture, right? That's usually the first thing that comes to mind, right? The particle board that they use
The
in the
glue that
furniture.
holds it together, the chipboard.
Exactly. Right. So that's 100% right. A lot of it has to do with the off-gassing, right? So that a lot of the times, like with formaldehyde, people say, okay, well, I have high formaldehyde. How do I fix that? Right. So the remediation for that is basically they come in and they use a machine that heats up the room to a point that all the formaldehyde that's trapped inside of these building materials, right? You think about laminate flooring, right? Laminate flooring is one of the biggest ones, right?
It's
So
just plastic and glue, basically.
exactly. And what happens is it basically is just it off gases, it releases this formaldehyde. So what we want to do is we want to speed up the process of the off gassing, right? And then they use a negative ion machine that basically sucks out that air, so it goes right out the window, right? And by doing that, they're basically speeding up the off gassing of all this formaldehyde, right? So that over time, that's how we reduce those levels, right? Because once all the formaldehyde is sucked out, there's not much there left, right? So naturally, the levels are going to get better, right? It's like putting out a fire, right? A burning fire is going to create smoke for a long time. But if you put that fire out, slowly that smoke is going to start to disappear.
And yeah, you talked about that heating up the room thing last time. I thought that was very cool. But
Yeah,
now you threw on the negative ions as well. Do you have a negative ion machine that you recommend for general use?
I don't. No, actually, that's not something that we actually like. My company, we do the inspection for the air quality and the VOCs and formaldehyde, but we actually use a remediation company they have all the equipment, right? They own all the equipment to actually go in and do the remediation part of the jobs afterwards.
I would appreciate if you could ask them if they have an ion generator
Yep.
recommendation, because I think that is also one of our biggest
Yep.
mitigation strategies is to fill
Yeah.
our homes with negative ions, basically, and those also should be attracting to bacteria and positive ions in general, which are also given out by our electronic devices, right? Our electronic devices give out frequencies, but they also give out positive ions, which are bad for us. So, to me, a negative ion generator is possibly one of the biggest solutions that we have available, and I'm still looking for an actual recommendation because there's a bunch of them out there on the market, but a bunch of them are junk. Um, you're talking about formaldehyde. So I know that formaldehyde is very common in things like carpeting. You know, you get a new carpet, new rug. It has that new furniture smell. Well,
Yeah.
that new
It's
furniture smell basically is formaldehyde and other chemicals, and that's
yeah.
why it takes
Yeah,
a few
usually it's a
years.
make. Yep, absolutely. Usually it's a makeup of the formaldehyde and the VOCs that create. People always ask. They say, "Well, why is my VOC so high?" Right? I mean, it could be anything from, buying a new purse. Right? The materials that are used to make the purse, right, are creating the high levels of VOCs. So it is something that is creating an issue, but it's I do have one machine that I actually um, use. It's an ozone machine, and that is actually used for killing bad air. Right. So it's actually something, you go into a home and a person smoked in there for the last 10 years. The smell is there, right? So we'll use the ozone machine, right? So we basically come in and with ozone, you have to all plants and humans and pets have to leave the home at the time of doing it, but it's basically one way of getting rid of some of the bad smelly air.
With ozone. Yeah,
Yeah,
ozone's
ozone.
a fairly popular method of filtering water as well. Like if you go to a restaurant, the fountain soda machine is usually an ozone filter, and
Yep.
I know dentists who use ozone to clean out the cavities when they're scraping out the bone and stuff, making sure it's not infected. you blast ozone in there to get into all the crevices and kill stuff. But yeah, it is kind of also a poison to us at the same time. So you do have to be a little
It
bit.
can be at certain concentrated levels, right?
One question here. So the formaldehyde is present basically on all these fabric things like your couch and your rug. Is it also just on general plastic stuff? Like you buy something that's new in plastic, it smells like plastic, but then that smell tends to go away after a while. Is that VOCs or formaldehyde or what?
I think that's probably more VOC. So a lot of things that are smell related are VOCs, right? Perfumes, right? Cooking, right? Frying. You're going to see really high levels of VOCs in that, and that's there's a lot of different types of VOCs, right? Formaldehyde is actually mostly off gassing of these building materials.
So the solution here to me is pretty obvious.
Yeah,
Stop buying
one.
this junk,
Yeah,
for
you
the
want to
most
buy.
part.
Stick to the hardwoods, right? When you're buying, if you're buying a bookshelf, you're buying a desk for your office, stick to the hardwood materials. Try and stay away from the particle board materials. I mean, yeah, there's a big difference in price, obviously, but long term, if you're concerned about like your air quality and the toxins that might be coming from it's a good idea to try and stick with the hardwoods.
Well, and let's just be real. Nobody's passing down their IKEA furniture to their grandkids, but your hardwood furniture can absolutely outlive you, no
Yeah,
problem.
yeah,
And
100%.
there's so much of it too. I mean, I bought a desk a little while ago for $1, solid hardwood, and very happy with it. And meanwhile, the desk that I'm actually using right now, it's so shaky. I don't know if you can see my camera shaking back and forth. This is me just lightly touching this piece of junk. My goodness. So yeah, definitely owning some higher quality things means you have to buy them less often anyways. And if you have to rebuy this stuff all the time, and every time you get something from the factory, it's covered in chemicals, even if it's wood, then one very obvious thing is to not buy new stuff as often. And if you have better quality stuff, then you don't need to buy it as often. And save some money anyways, so you don't have to keep rebuying stuff. This is a big problem in our society, to be honest. And let's use that to transition what you and I were talking about right before we hit record. We are talking about your EMF blocker for the Wi-Fi consoles.
Yeah.
Call them a console. What do you Wi-Fi
Yeah,
router
modems. Yeah. Yeah.
for the modems, the routers. So I bought one off of you, and I'm happy with it. You take the measurements, you make it fit the box. It's not a one size fits all thing. It fits my box perfectly. Looks great. Cuts down on the radio frequencies big time. Still functions perfectly fine. I have no complaints with it. And you were
Good.
talking about how you're beginning a U.S. ad campaign because you're in Ontario. Those who listened last time would know, but you're in Ontario, Canada, and you're not doing house calls basically anywhere else other than Ontario, Canada right now, but you can sell some of these products to the broader market. And I do
Yeah.
think the Wi-Fi router is a very sensible start because, as you mentioned, the Wi-Fi is the biggest source,
Yeah.
at least of radio frequencies in the
Yeah.
average home. So that block your biggest thing first, and there's less to do. You know, block the biggest thing first makes a lot of sense to me. Move the heaviest thing first when you're moving house, and then everything else is a little bit easier. Tackle the biggest problem first, and then smaller ones aren't such a big deal. So
Yeah.
I was just bringing this up. This transition thing is because we talked last time about similar, blocking devices that are on Amazon that are probably just absolute complete pieces of garbage
Yeah.
because that's one of the
It's all in
biggest
the
problems on
materials that
Amazon.
you use, right? It's all in the materials you use, and that's the thing, right? Is that like our modem covers? Actually, I am trying as of the end of January. We're going to be selling on Amazon as well. So we've recently opened sellers accounts with Amazon Canada and USA. They will be available for sale on Amazon. I think starting in February. It's all in the materials you're using. So we use a very, very effective RF foil that it's rated at 120 dB, right? And that's one of the things is people who are buying these products are not actually educated on how the measurement of these products work. These materials are all tested in a professional lab It's basically the room is like a Faraday box, right? So that there's no other signals in, and they're tested between 1 and 40 gigahertz. Okay, and then they're assigned based off of that a dB level, right? So I mean, your standard attenuation is about 35 to 40 dB, right? And at that level, it's about 99.9999% effective. The one we use is 120 dB. So the really, really, really strong, good materials you're going to find are going to be between 80 and 120. I say that's my professional opinion on
And
it.
most of them on Amazon, you probably won't even see the rating because
No,
they're
you won't.
trash.
That's
So
just it. Yeah.
yeah, the
So
only
they,
reason I'm bringing this up is just I'm so sick of buying junk. Honestly,
yep,
I don't buy very much off of Amazon, but now I've just completely stopped because, you know, if I do need this little thing like a coffee grinder or something, it shows up and it's just a piece of junk. So it seemed like it was a good deal, but I just wasted that money because it's a piece of junk and I'm gonna have to need to buy a new one. So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
similar with
100%.
all this furniture and a lot of these electronic devices. So much of what is on the market is just such garbage that it wasn't worth our money or time in the first place. And then it also just so happens that, oh, it's doused in chemicals and it off gases for 3 years or 5 years.
Yeah,
And now you got to come in and heat the house up to get the formaldehyde off. And when it comes to the electronic world, I'm positive that most of what is engineered currently is made to be a piece of garbage, to made to be a weak, replaceable piece of trash. And
yeah,
so this is driving us to spend so much more money on stuff we literally genuinely don't need. We are looking for devices to solve certain problems in our life or to play a DVD or whatever. But I, for one, would rather spend an extra $50. I would rather spend an extra 50% or 100% or even more than that if the things around us were designed well, designed to be strong, designed to last a long time, and maybe took some of this stuff into account. Like, for example, if you're making couches or you're making rugs or seats for new vehicles, you could very easily stick them in a hot room for a little while and speed up that off gassing for us before it hit the market. So it has less of a chemical residue. You could very easily shield the electronic components from leaking out, like our new record player here. It's the worst appliance in the house, actually. When it's the field that it's giving off, the electric field that it's giving off, when it's not turned on, is higher than anything else in the house. So that could easily be engineered out. And if we paid more attention to quality, then I think there's room in the budget now for the company selling these products to actually put some protective devices in. But when you have companies like Amazon, and I think it's good that you're selling on Amazon, by the way, I'm just saying that don't buy anything else on Amazon because it's total junk. But if there was room in the budget for companies to offer these types of specs, like, hey, our TV, not only is it a TV, and it's also built well, so you don't have to buy one every 5 years. But we also got this protective shield in it, so it doesn't radiate out forwards. It only radiates out backwards, or maybe it collects the static and dissipates it. You plug it into the ground. I don't know. This could be done, but when you have all these companies, and Amazon is the worst offender here, causing companies to compete only on price, then this is what we get. We get a world full of trash, cheap
yeah,
trash, that there
yeah,
is no room in the budget to improve the product because every company is busy doing everything it can to sell it as cheap as it possibly can to compete with
yeah.
everything else on Amazon. So good that you're putting some high quality stuff on Amazon. I like this cover that you've got. Are you still going to be doing custom measurements for your
Yeah,
customers on Amazon?
100%. It has to be that way, and it's been that way from the beginning. Because it's not only for modem covers, but wireless speakers, Google Home speakers, right? These are all things that like people ask for covers for, right? And so we do custom measurements. We customize the color. We use a cotton blended fabric to basically match the color for your home to match your decor. And so you can choose any color you want. Most common are gray and black. But some people I've had customers that have asked for green or asked for white. So we do customize by color and size.
Well, I'm gonna get a couple more off you too. I'm gonna get one from my mom's house and from my other house down in Texas. My wife's house. What a weird way to say this is. I don't know how to explain the situation, but yeah, I've got one for my house here. I want to get one for my house down there, and I'm noticing people, including my mom and a couple of my friends, that got those new Bell modems
Yeah.
here in Canada. I don't know people. most of the listeners are not from Canada, but Bell's the one of the two big companies here. If you want any kind of phone service or internet in most places in Canada, you're stuck with either Bell or Rogers. So these Bell boxes, though, the Bell modems, I believe they're all 5G now, and they're big, they're huge, and they are giving out a massive electric field and RF field. And yeah, some of my friends are complaining about this that have never spoken about this before. You know, I've been outspoken about EMF for many years. Most people in my normal life don't want to talk about it. Either they agree or they disagree. They just we've beaten the horse to death. They don't want to talk about it. But now, got people saying, "Hey, man, I just upgraded or whatever. I switched to Bell. I just moved, and they only got Bell here. And this new modem is killing us. Like we're having trouble sleeping. We're fighting. You know, husband wife they're fighting. All of a sudden, they're all agitated. What's going on? There's quite a lot of people that are noticing or believing that it's the Bell box that's causing it.
Yeah, because they're now running, like the frequencies are changing, right? The frequencies are changing, and again, in Canada, the frequencies we are still using right now are on the lower side, right, of the 5G. In the US, I think they're running upwards of 40 gigahertz right now, and it depends on your provider. But I can tell you this: I have actually a client that is very heavily involved in as a chiropractor with the National Hockey League, and they worked in the U.S. And when the U.S. turned on the 5G plus band, it made a lot of people sick, and she was one of them. And she was actually very sensitive to it, so it made her very sick. And she had Lyme disease, and was probably a little bit more sensitive than the average person. But that just goes to show that, you know, these frequencies are that are being pumped out are terrible for us, and the average person is not going to be able to feel it. But I can tell you that just because you can't feel it doesn't mean that it's not harming you, right? And that's where it comes down to, like, the secondary symptoms, like you were saying, right, with the being agitated, and like the way that it affects our sleep. People are complaining that they're not sleeping well. That's what it all comes down to. It's poison. They're toxins, right? And that's why I always say, like, when you think about it, in our homes, what do we have on every? So I'm a home inspector as well, right? And I do safety inspections, and part of our safety inspections that we do on every level of the home, there has to be smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. So, and the smoke and carbon monoxide, you can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't really smell it. Smoke, you can, right? So my whole thing is that with electromagnetic fields, right, and our air quality issues that we have, right, why do we not have detectors for this? Why do we not have alarms that are going to alarm us if the levels are too high? Right. And that's what I think really it comes down to is, I guess we do, right? We have EMF meters now that are mobile that we can walk around the house with, but I think that's kind of what it comes down to.
No, I see what you're saying, though. If you had these in your homes, well, first of all, it would make people actually aware when fields are increasing. And second of all, I think it could tie into actually how we interact with each other out in the wild. I mentioned last time at the end of our talk last time that the book The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg, which I think is the best EMF book out there currently. I haven't read them all, but it's the best one currently. We did an episode on that recently, by the way, listeners. You can go listen to the deep dive on The Invisible Rainbow. It's called Invisible Rainbow Part 2, because we had another talk also titled Invisible Rainbow. But this newest one, we actually go through the book. But anyways, at the end of that, Furstenberg suggests that this should be like, someone walking into your home with a lit cigarette or with muddy boots. You would say, take your muddy boots off, please. Or, don't you dare smoke a cigar in my house. This is very, very normal. Nobody would think that's weird at all. Whereas currently, it would be weird to ask somebody to turn off their phone when coming into your home. But I think having meters placed around would let people know, like, hey, there's 6 of us sitting in a room right now with a phone, and it's causing the the equivalent of the smoke detector to go off right now, telling us, hey, we're sitting in levels that are dangerously high. And I would love to see the world morph into that, where, hey, if you're coming over to my house, it's disrespectful to bring your phone. I already feel that way personally. It's just this hasn't caught on culturally yet. But you're disrespecting me by bringing your phone into my home. You don't need your phone. We didn't grow up needing phones every 2 seconds. You know, Mom, I'm going out. Okay, see you later. Right?
Yeah,
If you're in
absolutely.
trouble, call. If you're not home by tomorrow, I guess I'll call the cops. I don't know. We figured it out, and we were able to have friendships and relationships and sit in a room with each other and just be with each other. Because if you're sitting in my living room and you're on your phone, I don't even want you in my house. You're wasting my time. I have things to do. I'm going a little bit dramatic here for effect, but I think it's important, and I think there is a growing movement realizing that us having these phones all the time is destructive on numerous levels, and that's whether you believe in the health effects or not.
Yeah.
Last year, 2023, there was this Forbes article going around. Everyone was talking about it, saying that Gen Z is the loneliest generation ever, the loneliest generation ever documented by surveys. So we're in this so-called age of connection here, the age of social media, and yet what it's produced is the loneliest generation ever. And I think that would be very obvious. You don't have to do a scientific study to say that the generations most saturated, that use their phones the most, that watch the most TV and all this stuff, obviously they're having the most issues. They are depressed. They're having lots of psychosocial issues. And to me, the solution is stop using the phone. Stop using it. Stop scrolling it. Put boundaries in place. Do not sleep with a phone in your room. Don't check it the first thing in the morning. This is poisoning you from the EMF level, and it's poisoning you from the psychological level, and it's poisoning us sociologically as well. Like I said, I genuinely don't want to be around people on their phones. We're not in the same room together at all. Basically, your attention is being drawn to the little black box in your hand. What is the point of sitting in the room with me? I don't want to sit here and look at you on your phone. Sounds like I've been penting up on this for a while, and I kind of have. It's getting ridiculous. It's long. We touched on this on our last talk too, but it's way past the point of ridiculousness. Everybody has to realize that we have a problem here when we can't stand in line at the grocery store for 25 seconds without checking our phone and all that stuff. Again, commented last time, but it's about time to implement this. And sorry for the rant here, but if there was EMF meters around, maybe that would be inching us towards the type of society where it is totally normal for you to not bring your phone inside. And just like a lit cigarette, I would not bring a lit cigarette into someone's house. They should obviously not want that, and it should be very, very normal for them to say, please don't turn your phone on. Please leave your phone outside. And this is true with, all venues and stuff. Just leave your phone, just leave it away. Let's just experience life together. Let's be friends together. If you want to sit on the phone, go do it by yourself.
Absolutely. I agree 100% with that. I think that, families should put their phone at the table when they will first walk in the house and actually spend time together, right? Disconnect from the outer world and start paying attention to each other instead of just what's on our phone.
Yeah, it's not doing us any good at all here. So before we go, I just want to read a couple more points from this book that I had saved, because I'm not going to do a deep dive episode on this Dirty Electricity book. It was a pretty good book, but just picked a few points out here. So he's talking about the death rates from 1930 to 1940 in America. This was when rural electrification was largely taking place. Like, even though the first commercial electric generating plant was in 1882, it took quite a long time for the
100%.
rural America to get electrified. So in 1930 to 1940, there were still many places that were not electrified. Death rates for all causes were generally lower in the rural areas in the countryside. And rural death rates were strongly and significantly correlated with the level of electric service. So the more electric service they had, the more death rates they had in the rural countryside. That's for most causes examined. The all-causes mortality rate was similar in urban and rural areas of states with high levels of electrification. So, in other words, the states that had high levels of electrification didn't really matter whether you were rural or city. You were still on the short end of the stick, basically. Your all-cause mortality was still higher, even if you were in the countryside, as long as the countryside was electrified. And by the way, throughout basically all of history, any study that's been done, almost always the rural death rate is lower. Just you're healthier in the country. It's always been that way
More
as far as
away
we can tell.
from exactly, yeah. Yeah.
And not even just EMF. You've also got pollution, stress, noise,
Yep.
food quality, air quality, all kinds of stuff. So states with low levels of electrification, below 50%, had all causes death rates at levels twice as high in urban as rural areas. So they're saying states with low levels of electrification, the urban areas had death rates twice as high as the rural areas in those states.
Yeah. That's an interesting fact too.
Yeah, and he's continuing on here. Nationally, the total cancer rate in 1930 was 58.8% higher in urban than in rural areas. So more than 50% higher in the city than in the country. This pattern indicates that the 20th century epidemic of cancers and cardiovascular diseases was not caused by lifestyle variables, as is commonly assumed, but rather by EMF exposure and probably dirty electricity. That's what the whole book is about, dirty electricity.
Yeah.
The price we have paid for the convenience of electricity in morbidity and mortality since the early 1900s almost defies quantification. And on the same page here, he's talking about New Delhi, India, compared with a rural area 50 kilometers away. The prevalence of coronary heart disease was 3 times higher in the urban residents, despite the fact that the rural residents smoked more and had higher total caloric and saturated fat intakes. I mentioned earlier that up here in the country, yeah, smoking rates probably are 50%. And overall, actually, this has been an interesting observation that almost always when they look at country versus city, the country people do everything wrong. You know, we smoke more in the country, we drink more in the country, they do a lot of drugs up here. You know, the pretty much the only cause of death here in town up in the far north is fentanyl these days. So it's the only thing that's killing people up here, other than maybe some dirt bike accidents or something like that. But in terms of things that you would ingest or are exposed to, usually it's actually a lot worse up here, and people are less they're not less aware, they don't care as much about being exposed to things like diesel fuel and gasoline and chemicals. It just, there's a different attitude where they don't really care, whereas people down in the city, and I'm not making fun of them, I'm one of these people too, tend to be way more picky. You know, I say I'm gluten free up here, people look at me with that side eye, like, you need to go back down to Toronto, boy. You know, but really down in the city, they're very health conscious. They're doing all kinds of things. They're buying all kinds of products that are supposed to be better for them. Yet all cause mortality is much higher in the cities in general. So just saying that, yeah, we do a lot worse stuff on paper in the country, and yet our death rates are a lot lower. And apparently that's true in India as well. As well here, the Amish have lower rates of cancer, cardiovascular disease, and suicide. And I would say, if you don't know much about the Amish, I would say that's despite the fact that they eat a ton of gluten, they eat a ton of sugar, the Amish, honestly. They love sugar. They really do. They'll put it on almost anything. And yeah, they're not gluten-free. They don't smoke, they don't drink, but they're not all 100% clean. Just pointing that out. But yet, their cancer rates are much lower. Their type 2 diabetes rates are about half those of the non-Amish, even though their obesity rates are comparable. And yeah, they're not a super slim people. I blame the gluten and the sugar, causing a lot of them to be overweight, and yet still half the diabetes, even though they do actually have an obesity problem in the Amish communities as well.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that when you take these other factors into account, they still don't outweigh the obvious impact of being in an electrified environment. What's your favorite study, Mike, about any of this?
My favorite study is, well, for us, we mostly pay attention to the there was actually a study here that I found. Give me one second, I'll just bring it up. It's the Bio-Initiative report. And the Bio-Initiative report is it was actually brought up by the Bio-Initiative report was actually by a bunch of EMF doctors that did studies on animals and did studies on humans and the different things and how EMFs basically affected us, right? A lot of this, it's all available online. I'm trying to find the website here. It's bioinitiative.org. and it's a whole report. And this is actually what we where we tell our clients to go to, right? Or people that want to know how EMFs affect the body, right? And there's all these reports are done by these scientists, and the different things. Like I can tell you a few of the areas that they actually cover are uh, evidence of how it affects children and why children are more vulnerable, right? How it creates and they're finding it infertility, right? There's a lot of people that are becoming more sterile, can't have kids, right? Um, so there's a lot of different studies that are done there, but definitely this is the area where we always send people to is byinitiative.org.
Yeah, good resource there. I've looked through that as
Yeah.
well. So, like I said, I know we're kind of heading out here around the 2 hour mark, but I do want to read these last few points that I've got saved here. Magda Havas has shown that dirty electricity raises blood glucose levels and changes insulin requirements in diabetics. And this was also mentioned in the Invisible Rainbow book, and it's something that kind of confused me a little bit, but it does make a bit of sense. I don't think I've made full sense of it yet, but diabetes used to be a disease of wasting away. It used to be that you would expect someone to be, this is way before my time, by the way. This is like 1800s, early 1900s, where diabetes used to be a disease of skinny people where they're unable to gain weight and they look like a skeleton that they're about to die. But now it's associated more with obesity. And the primary risk of it is the cardiovascular component, the circulatory component. So you don't necessarily die of high blood sugar levels, but the high blood sugar levels correspond with cardiovascular problems, heart disease, plaque buildup, and that's what's probably going to kill you. It's going to be a heart attack or a stroke or something like that, or maybe even a septic infection from the gangrene or some other surgery that you had to have because your kidneys failed, because that's a circulation problem. Basically, the tiny little veins in the kidneys at the eyes,
Yeah.
they clog up. These mean some of the main complications with diabetes. I'm just saying it's not the diabetes itself that kills you. It's the cardiovascular risk usually, or something in association with the diabetes, not the diabetes itself that kills you. But they're saying here that the blood glucose connection could be how dirty electricity increases cardiovascular disease incidence. So they're trying to explain why they find more cardiovascular disease incidence in, let's say, the city versus the country, or people who are more exposed. So they're saying maybe this actually explains it. It's not because the EMF is causing the cardiovascular problem, but actually because it's causing the increased blood glucose and presumably also insulin resistance, which is the foundation of the metabolic syndrome that is the heart of the cardiovascular problem. And that might be too complicated to some listeners, but I know some listeners will, they'll have digested a bunch of our stuff before, and hopefully that makes sense that the diabetes itself isn't really the primary problem here. That's not what's actually going to kill them. But if the EMF is causing that blood sugar problem, then that could therefore also cause the cascading problems related to diabetes.
Yeah.
And the same researcher has also shown that cordless phones basically can cause an instant change in heart rate and rhythm in some exposed individuals. So this is another thing I get asked about all the time. Hey, I have elevated heart rate or palpitations or tachycardia or something like that. What could be causing it? And just like we were talking about earlier with the tinnitus, I can't say immediately whether it was osteoporosis of the skull or dehydration or EMF. And this is another case where, yeah, I know definitely that EMF exposure could absolutely raise your heart rate right now, immediately, or could cause an irregular heartbeat immediately. But I can't say that for sure. It's just you should be aware as a listener that this could be one of the things. And Mike, I'll tell you, sometimes we have difficult cases who don't respond how I expect, and so I have to get on a Zoom call with them or something and start looking like a detective, looking closer for the source of the problem.
Yeah.
And I've been saying this for years. It's getting harder and harder to help people. We're getting more and more difficult cases, even though most people still are relatively easy to fix their problems. We get more and more difficult cases, and this is set across the industry. Even I was reading a big book about cancer recently, the transcripts from Truth About Cancer, and one of the authors in there was saying it used to be easier to help people with cancer 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. That we used to be able to only use B17, for example, and boom, the cancer's gone. And he was saying now it's not that anymore. There is no, one thing that we can use. Now we have to use 10 different things and hope that it works. I'm just saying, I hear this all the time. And now that I'm doing these interviews with people with tough cases, trying to figure out what's going on with them, I will usually ask, are you in a high EMF zone? Do you have a cell phone tower or a voltage line near your house? And a lot of the times they're not, to be honest. But I'm just saying this because I don't think it's a good benchmark to say that, oh, because I'm not close to a cell phone tower or a high voltage line or a transfer station, because I'm not close to one of those sources, therefore I'm not exposed to much EMF. Therefore, we can rule it out as one of the things that's causing my tachycardia, for example, or diabetes, for example. So I'm saying I've let a lot of people off the hook on these interviews, being like, okay, they say they live in the country, they don't have any cell phone towers anywhere near them, and me trying to move on and look for some other cause of their problem. Meanwhile, I know in the back of my head, I just can't bring it to the front of my mouth because it sounds like an excuse that I can't find the real answer. But I know in the back of my head that even the smaller exposures that we're all getting in our houses, like this person's talking to me on a cell phone. I know he's not getting zero exposure. He's obviously getting some exposure. Just because he's not living beside a cell phone tower doesn't mean he's not getting exposure. I'm just saying that I think I've let a lot of people off the hook too quickly, just because they're not living next to a cell phone tower, thinking that that might not be the cause of their problem. But absolutely, just having a cell phone, just having a Wi-Fi in your house, just sitting next to an outlet or sleeping next to an outlet, just having an alarm clock in your room. Once we bought the meters, I didn't know how bad alarm clocks actually were. I knew that they were not innocuous, but I couldn't believe that they were giving off a huge field, actually, a huge electric field.
Yeah, it's very big. Yeah. And that's one of the things people, I mean, try telling people that they can't have the alarm clock on their nightstand because it's bad for them, right? It's, but my whole thing is, tell me this. So what's the main function of an alarm clock? To tell you the time and to wake you up, right? So can you see your alarm clock 4 or 5 feet away on your dresser instead of on your nightstand? Most people can, unless you have bad eyes, obviously, which is something that you can't control. But the electric fields within after 5 feet, they drop right off, right? So the benefit is there for you to have your alarm clocks, your lamps, even of course your cell phones, and making sure that they're not within close proximity of less than 3 feet, right? Because if you measure that alarm clock right at the alarm clock, your levels are going to be off the charts. For every foot that you step away from the alarm clock, you're going to see the electric fields drop right off. And that's why I always tell clients, like, what the difference between having it right directly beside the bed and 3 to 5 feet away is massive. You might think it's nothing, but it's massive just because of how electric fields and even magnetic fields, the properties of them are a lot different than our wireless radiation.
Yeah, it is interesting. So yeah, it doesn't have to be a big device. It doesn't have to be a television or a computer or a washing machine or something like that. The little clock is not can be. It is. It is a huge source. And by the way, I can't see the clock 4 feet away. I'm pretty blind, to be honest. So I cannot read the clock across the room or whatever. So I just unplugged it. I just unplugged everything in my bedroom. Actually, just even
That's
though
cool.
I'm kind of lucky in this old house here that was built before electricity, that they just retrofitted in the plugs later on. And so that we don't have that many plugs in this house, actually. Sometimes it's annoying. One of our bathrooms has no plugs in it at all. So you can't it's not like I run a hair blower or something, but you couldn't if you wanted to. And yeah, in the bedrooms, there's only one plug in the whole bedroom. So it's pretty easy just to unplug it. And it's on the other side of the room anyway. So I'm grateful for that. But yeah, you should not keep a clock next to your head. I'm grateful I can wake up whenever I want, but still, if I needed an alarm, I'll put it on the other side of the room for sure. want to read just a little bit more from this book. He's talking again about that interrupting the AC flow, and he's pointing out that that little box that we plug our cell phones into to charge, or your tablet, or even the box on your laptop charger. That's what that's doing. It's interrupting the AC, 1,000 times a second or whatever, to create the DC to charge your device. And that's probably one of the reasons why you shouldn't use your devices when they're plugged in. Like, you should just leave them, let them charge. Don't put them in your hand, because the EMF is way, way, way worse at that point. And so even your laptop, using it unplugged is actually a lot better for you. Anytime it's plugged in, it's creating this dirty electricity. So that's a big problem. And the last point I saved here on this page was to illustrate just how far dirty electricity effects can extend. After someone here filtered a Midwestern school, a dairy farmer a quarter of a mile away noticed that his cows each gave an average of 10 pounds more milk per day, beginning the day the school was filtered. They put in these EMF filters, these dirty electricity filters, and 10 pounds more milk per day, beginning immediately.
Yeah.
That was very, very interesting. And there's one here also as well. I've got 2 more points that I saved from this book, and we can put this down. In 2006, the author here received a letter from a retired RCMP, federal police in Canada, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who had developed testicular cancer from holding energized radar guns in his lap. And one of his trainees here from the CDC had co-authored a case report showing that police officers who held radar guns in their laps had about 7 times the expected risk of testicular cancer, which is one of the rarest cancers, by the way, testicular cancer. Not something you see every day, but 7 times the expected risk. And that would be something that would be extremely easy to mitigate. Stop using those devices. Pretty simple.
Yep.
He was saying here that he was measuring, he was just going around places measuring, and he was saying that hospitals and an oncology clinic were actually the worst, among his worst offenders here. It is interesting that hospitals are one of the worst places for EMF. And yeah, many cancer clinics, I post them all the time on Transcend Towers. Many of them have cell phone towers on their roof. It's very, very silly. But here, the final point that I saved here is in his remedies section. He's saying most of the devices that generate dirty electricity can be redesigned to eliminate it at very low cost. They can be. We just need to provoke the industry to do this. We just need to demand this. We need to buy higher quality stuff with more engineering and better engineering. New buildings should be designed with dirty electricity levels in mind. Existing schools, hospitals, and medical facilities should be surveyed. Hey, that's what you do, Mike. And filtered to reduce dirty electricity levels. Many of the large childhood and adult cancer studies done over the past 30 years should be revisited using the new GS meter. So I guess there's problems with the meters in the old studies. I predict that their risk ratios will increase. Also, a new generation of animal exposure studies should be done using dirty electricity as the new exposure metric. So I do see that in some of the problems with the research, that they would be looking only at certain frequencies, especially in the high frequency range, not realizing that it may be the dirty electricity, the low frequencies, that's actually causing the problem, but they're not measuring the low frequencies. So the studies were confusing, basically. And you add ions and mold and other stuff into those, confounding factors in, and yeah, it can definitely become quite confusing. So he's saying we need to go back and redo some of the studies that were done before, because now we have new meters and now we know all these different things. We should take them into account.
Well, I mean, even with like Gauss meters, right? Gauss meters have changed so much over the years, right? You have single axis Gauss meters and you have triple axis Gauss meters, right? Triple axis Gauss meters, basically, they do all the calculations for you, but because of the way magnetic fields move and bend, single axis magnetic field meters, there's a calculation that you actually have to do with it. And they teach us that in building biology school. But the good news is the building biology meters we use with gigahertz solutions are triple axis. They're more accurate and they provide us a straight answer.
Yeah, better meters will get to the
as well.
Get to the bottom of it faster.
That's right. Yep.
So I think this was a good session here, Mike. Do you have anything else that you want to add, elaborate on?
No, I mean, I think that we've pretty much touched on everything there. I don't think there's anything really more that I have to add here.
Okay, and we can always come back and do another one. It's been great having you. Remember,
Absolutely.
everyone, especially for those of you who are in Ontario, you can most definitely utilize Mike's service. You can see everything that he does and get in contact with him on safeguard-solutions.ca. Got to put that dash in there. This is in the description as well. You can find Mike on Instagram. He posts a lot on Instagram at Safeguard Solutions. Is it just at Safeguard Solutions?
It's safe_guard_solutions.
At safe_guard_solutions on Instagram. You can definitely pick yourself up one of his Wi-Fi covers. As mentioned, it's not worth buying something on Amazon right now, like another brand on Amazon, if it's a complete piece of junk. It might only cost $20, but it's a waste of $20 if it doesn't actually fix the problem.
Yeah.
So
our modem covers are 100% guaranteed to reduce the amount of wireless radiation or money back. It's a money back guarantee for us. And those actually can now be purchased right off our website as well.
Sweet. And are you selling those dirty electricity filters on your website as well?
No, not yet, but that's one of the products we're actually going to be adding on.
Okay, cool. I'm going to get a few more of those as well because you got to put one on each circuit, correct?
That's right. Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
So on your fuse box, I'm not an electrical engineer. I just kind of learned this recently. That's what all those different switches are for, right? If you got to go down and flip your breaker for that one switch, that means that's one circuit. So you got 10, 12 different circuits on your board. If you really want to protect the entire house, you got to put one of those dirty electricity filters on one of the plugs in each circuit. So it can add up to a fair bit, but I definitely think it's worth doing, especially on the circuits that you spend the most time in, first and foremost. For me, it's the bedroom and the living room. So protect both of those as your priority, and then the other circuits aren't that important. You can do those later. These devices are collectible. You don't need to buy them all at once. You don't need to buy them every single month. Not like a supplement here. So yeah, you can find those on Mike's website. And even for those of you who aren't in Ontario, if you do know anyone in Ontario, I think you should tell them about Mike, especially those who are looking for new homes, because that is the last thing you want to do is invest millions of dollars now where you live down in Toronto. You're buying a little bungalow for $2 million or something. The last thing you want is to get yourself into a 30-year mortgage on a property that has inappropriate levels or ridiculously high levels of EMF or something. Just go and figure this out before you make such a huge investment. And if you do know people who are having problems in their house, maybe it is something like insomnia or irritability or whatever, check it out, because it is very likely that you'll find some major source that you might be able to correlate towards the problem, especially the sleeping problems. That is the most obvious. You clean up the bedroom, clean up the environment of the bedroom, watch yourself sleep better. It's a pretty easy thing to measure and see the results on. So yeah, even those of you who are not in Ontario, we'd both appreciate it. And Mike's not paying me for any of this, by the way. There's no affiliate link or anything like that. I just like Mike and I like his business, and we need more businesses like this because we have so many businesses that are just producing stuff, whether it's houses or cars or consumer products, that is not paying attention to the health consequences of it. So we 100% need people checking our homes, checking our cars, checking our devices, and showing us, consumers, how we can mitigate these problems, because for the most part, the manufacturers are not willing to do anything about it. Unfortunately, most of it is up to us, at least right now. And yeah, we need people like Mike. So appreciate the support for him. Appreciate everybody listening and watching. Those of you who are watching on the Patreon, thank you very much. If you do want to support this podcast more, you can do that through Patreon. We do appreciate that. All the episodes do release at least 1 week early on Patreon, and sometimes several weeks if I'm ahead of myself here. It can post several weeks early on Patreon before it goes on to podcast or YouTube or wherever else. And of course, once again, you can find everything that I do on notusbooks.org, including the Patreon link. All of these links are in the description. Mike, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. honestly, thank you for having us on.
You are welcome. We'll have you back on soon. Get even deeper into this.
Absolutely. Sounds great. Let's do it. Thank you very much for having us.
And thank you once again. Thank you, everybody else. Stay healthy, everyone. Until next time.